I invite you to follow along in the reading of the gospel this morning. The gospel according to Mark in the 7th chapter. We'll read 3 different portions, and you can follow along in the Pew Bible on page 39. Listen for God's word. Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" Jesus said to them, "Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition." In verse 14, then Jesus called the crowd again and said to them, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand there is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile." Then in verse 21, For it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come: fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, and folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Wash your hands. Can you imagine a biblical text that would be more timely for us than a passage about washing our hands? Maybe you, like me, thought that everything we needed to know about hand washing we learned in kindergarten, right? But no. Before the pandemic, I did not know that a proper hand washing should last as long as 2 rounds of happy birthday, at least. According to infectious disease experts, a thorough hand washing should last this long. Anyone want to confess? That's 20 seconds. That's only 20 seconds. And I see Brent practicing to see if that's how long he washes his hands. Jesus' disciples in our passage were caught red-handed with poor hand washing or no hand washing. There. Okay. That was 2 times, 2 hand washings. That's really clean. They were caught not washing hands by the Pharisees and some scribes who came from Jerusalem. And apparently they were observing Jesus and his group, and they brought their observations to Jesus about his disciples. "Why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with unwashed hands?" Were these religious leaders concerned about COVID-19? No, they were not. Were they concerned about the spread of germs from sharing food from the market that had not been washed? No, they were not. Mark, the gospel writer, isn't sure that all of us readers know what they're talking about here, so he fills in a little background. The Pharisees and all the Jews, he says, do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. And they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are many other traditions that they observe, washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. These are spiritual practices of ritual cleansing in Jewish tradition practiced in Jesus' day, but they were not about germs as we understand them. They were markers of ways to remember God and remember that they were the people of God. As a faith, Judaism is remarkable for how it came to be practiced in the most intimate settings, in daily routines, so that a believer does not have to go somewhere to practice their faith. They are reminded of the Lord when they get up, when they lie down, when they eat a meal, when they go to the market, and when they come home. The purity laws that are spelled out in the Torah have been long studied and ridiculed for being petty, fussy, and discriminatory towards women, among others. But according to some scholars, like Mary Douglas, this was not their primary goal. The laws of purity were meant to set apart the people, to designate them as holy, remind them from the youngest to the oldest that they are special, that they are loved by God and set apart to demonstrate the holiness of Almighty God. By the time Jesus was born and practiced his ministry, there were divisions within Judaism about how best to remain the people of God under the rule of the Romans. One party felt like it was best to blend in, not stand out, just fly under the radar and not be noticed. But there was another camp that thought the best way to retain their identity was to be extra careful and extra pure and holy and set apart. The Pharisees were in this purist camp. Practice the laws given to Moses to the nth degree was their goal. That is how to get through this oppressive time under the Romans and still retain their identity as the people of God. Jesus did not fit into the purist camp, nor any other camp, we might add, not zealots or Essenes or lots of splinter groups that existed. Jesus saw the people for whom carrying out the law specifically made their hard lives even harder. The poor who couldn't afford the right animals required for sacrifice. The sick who were barred from the community because they were considered unclean. By the time the Pharisees and the scribes confront Jesus, in our reading from today, Jesus has had a rough week. He was rejected in his hometown. John the Baptist was murdered. Jesus' disciples' attempt at a Sabbath retreat is canceled by an overwhelming crush of crowds. Jesus tries to gain some solitude for them in a boat, but the crowds recognize him and he is drawn back into shore. With compassion, Jesus teaches the people until late in the day and they become hungry. And Jesus' disciples say, "What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do for them?" So Jesus takes what they have, the loaves and the fish, and blesses them, breaks them, and gives them out in the hands of the disciples, and 5,000 are fed. Finally, Jesus dismisses his weary band to cross the sea in a boat and meet him on the other side, and he is going to go up in the hills to pray. But there is a storm, and from the hillside, Jesus can see his disciples struggling in the boat. So he goes to them once more, walking on the water. "Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid." And the wind is quieted, And when they pull up the boat on the far shore, again, they are surrounded by crowds. And Jesus has once again been surrounded by the sick. He's had a rough week. So the Pharisees from Jerusalem may have stepped on Jesus' last nerve. He calls them hypocrites, and he lobs at them a prophecy from Isaiah. This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. This would have been scandalous to the Pharisees, who upheld the law as the gift of God and not a human tradition. However, Jesus recognized that the law was never meant to become empty rules and petty criticisms. Jesus cries out to the Pharisees in Matthew 23, "You tithe your mint and your dill and your cumin, but you neglect the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others." So Jesus turns to the people. Listen to me, all of you, and understand there's nothing outside that comes in a person that defiles them. The things that come out are what defile us. We are not made unclean by helping and touching the sick or the dying, for example, but the blaming and shunning that come out from our hearts are what makes us unclean. Jesus then gives us a laundry list of examples of some of the slime that human hearts spew. It's a long list of churchy words like fornication and avarice and slander and folly. But let's translate them and see what they might mean for us. Fornication and adultery, becoming intimate with someone who is already in a relationship with someone else, or investing our own emotions with someone instead of our committed partner. Theft and murder, stealing what belongs to someone else, or taking the life that belongs to someone else. Avarice and envy, thirsting for what belongs to another. Wickedness and deceit, twisting and bending the truth to deceive someone. Slander, telling lies about someone, or passing on a delicious bit of gossip. Pride. Pride is a toughie, because pride is a good thing to a certain degree. Pride is an important word and concept in the LGBTQ community. Pride is healthy, but not pride that puts others down so we can feel more important. Not pride that takes all the credit for something ourselves instead of thanking God. Licentiousness and folly, doing whatever the H we please without caring about how it impacts someone else, as though the earth were our own and not lent to us by God. These are the germs of illness that we carry inside. When we let them out in our words and our actions, they infect others and they sicken us as well. Washing our hands matters, especially in time of pandemic, but washing our heart matters too. Heart sanitizing, heart scrubbing is a healthy and spiritual practice. Bruce Pruer is a spiritual writer who was talking about this passage, and he cautions us against misreading Jesus. Our human emotions in and of themselves are not evil or defiling. He says in the gospel reading this morning, Jesus did not say that you are defiled if you have thoughts and feelings about illicit sex, slander, envy, greed, theft, murder, deceit, etc. What Jesus is saying here is if we let these things out, let them be expressed in actions, then we are defiled. It is the evils that come out of a person that defile them. It's the things we let loose on the world. In my work at Lutheran Counseling Services, I started at a new site this month, a preschool, providing mental health counseling in a preschool. You might say, why would 2-, 3-, and 4-year-olds need counseling? And that is a very good question. Not because they are ill or broken. Their presenting concerns are more like hitting or biting or not sharing. These outward behaviors are very often coming from big feelings inside that they don't have the words or the ability to express in a constructive way. Feelings like grief or worry or fear or jealousy or anger. Helping these little ones find ways to know what they're feeling and to learn how to express those feelings, learn how to calm themselves down, learn how to cope with challenges that come, is building a foundation of interpersonal skills and emotional intelligence. When you and I feel like hitting or biting or not sharing, we too can take a deep breath and pause before we let this loose on the world. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a right spirit within me. Psalm 51:10 is credited to King David. And from Dan and Helen's sermons this summer, we know what King David knew about inner thoughts that come out in actions that defile. Create in me a clean heart. How do we go about heart cleaning? Good places to start are reflection, and prayer, and confession. According to Jesus in Matthew 23, tithe your dill and your mint and your cumin, your resources, and try to work on justice, mercy, and faith. We can explore our shadow side. Open ourselves to acknowledging the nooks and crannies in our hearts that we would rather avoid. We can get a second opinion. If we're lucky, we have a trusted friend who might come to us and say, I see that your frustrations are starting to build and are at the point of blowing, and can I help in some way? We may engage a therapist in this work. And the advantage of that is they come in handy because you can fire them if you don't like what they say. And the Epistle of James gives us good counsel. Be quick to listen and slow to speak, slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. And as James suggests, we can get busy. Be doers of the word and not hearers only, who deceive themselves, James says. When we're busy caring for the homeless and the loveless, there's less time and energy for licentiousness and folly. When we look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being doers who act, James says, we will be less likely to be looking at others and fumbling toward fornication. Every time we scrub our hands, Maybe we can remember to scrub our hearts at the same time. We can time ourselves with 20 seconds of a psalm or a song, or by singing stanzas of a hymn. Friends, in this, God is with us. In fulfillment of God's own purpose, God gave us birth by the word of truth, Jesus Christ, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of God's creatures. May we get on to hand washing and heart scrubbing.